I'm Laura Tyler, standing outside the TIFF Lightbox here in Toronto. We're about to talk to Steve Gravestock about the Canadian film initiatives at the TIFF Lightbox and the Toronto International Film Festival. So if you just want to start off by telling me a little bit about the development of the TIFF Lightbox and where it is right now.
Sure. It was the brainchild of our CEO and the co-director of the festival, Piers Handling, and Michelle Mayhew, our executive director. And the fundraising went on for a number of years, and we opened in September as part of the festival, and then the official opening was about a week later. Right now we have there's a number of film screening, including the Oscar-nominated Ensemble. We have a couple of exhibitions going on as well, a big exhibit on Tim Burton, the American filmmaker, and also a really smart, quite insightful exhibit on Mary Pickford in our Canadian gallery on the 4th floor of the building. She was, of course, one of the first movie stars, and it deals with the development of movie stardom, and it's full of kind of marginalia, costumes, the way they actually marketed people, even in the beginning of the, because Pickford was, from the teens on, was a big star. In fact, one of the first movie stars. She was actually one of the first people that audience members, initially silent films didn't have credits, and I think she was so popular that audiences wrote in and wanted to know who she was, and that kind of sparked the whole star system. It's a beautiful display and quite smart in terms of how it assesses the development of stardom and Pickford's career as well.
So can you tell me anything about the immediate future for what's going on here?
Upcoming in March, we launch a new series called The New Auteurs, and the first director as part of that program is Denis Côté, the Quebecois filmmaker, who we've shown a number of his films, almost all of his features at TIFF. And he's had 2 films on Canada's Top 10 annual list we do, voted on by an independent panel of filmmakers, critics, industry professionals. And it opens on March the 4th. And it's a showcase of all his features and a number of his short films as well, including a great video, a film shot on video he did called Enemy Lines, and we'll also be showing his first feature, Les États Nordiques, his second film, Nos Vies Privées, his third, Elle Veut le Chaos, a kind of a black and white gangster movie, although not like most gangster movies, and his fourth film, which, as I mentioned before, was on Top 10 for 2009, Carcass. And they're quite innovative and very original, and it's going to be a very interesting series. And in my opinion, I think he's one of the finest filmmakers, not only in Canada, one of the finest filmmakers working today, not only in Canada or Quebec, but internationally as well.
So can you tell me a little bit about some of the Canadian film initiatives you've got going on here?
Sure. Well, since we opened the building, since we opened TIFF Bell Lightbox in September, we've had the privilege of showing a lot of Canadian work. It's part of our mandate. It's one of the things that's most important to us. The first couple films in the building were Trigger, the Bruce McDonald film, also a Top 10 film, and with Molly Parker and Tracy Wright. And we followed that with Les Amours Imaginaires, the second film from the wunderkind of Quebecois cinema, Xavier Dolan. We opened Ensemble in January, right before the Top 10, which we just finished up. It's actually now playing. The Top 10, I think, started in Vancouver last week and is also in Ottawa and is going to Montreal in March. So it's traveling around the country. We just showed Barry Everich's documentary on Harvey Weinstein, one of the co-founders of Miramax. A really smart documentary, a real kind of capsule history of the industry from the 1980s on, quite sharp. We have ongoing educational events. We had Paul Haggis in a couple days ago, or a week ago. We've had student events. There's an ongoing event for students, Higher Learning Fridays, where we've had people like Jacob Tierney in, who discussed his most recent film, Good Neighbors. Jacob, of course, did the Trotsky special event with Ingrid Veninger, who's a producer, director, and actor, and her first solo effort as a director was on the top 10 this year as well, a film called Modra, which she shot for pretty much no money in Slovakia, actually in Bratislava, using largely her family, and stars her daughter, Hallie Switzer, and in a great performance, a really beautiful film, which I think is sort of still playing around the city.
Can you tell me a little bit about Film Circuit and its plans for expansion, perhaps?
There are groups in almost every province. What the circuit does is they work with local groups. They actually program their own material. They send out lists of what's available to the local groups. Often these groups are attached to charities, hospitals, libraries, art galleries, or not-for-profit organizations or institutions. And it was designed with the intent of getting Canadian films out to Canadian audiences, and it's extremely successful at doing that. I mean, some of the films that it has helped significantly at the box office include films like Away From Her, where it was kind of a pre-release for the film, which Sarah Polley's film, of course, Water, Deepa Meda's movie, 1 Week, Michael McGowan's film, and a number of international titles as well. And it plays. The film's played to very appreciative and smart audiences across Canada.
So everyone knows that attendance to Canadian films is somewhat limited in cases. So some argue that it's an issue of exhibition. Obviously, you're exhibiting Canadian films. How are the attendance to them going?
It's going quite well. Ensendie has done really, really well. People talk about the exhibition problem. The major problem is that there was no real policy until the late 30s. Certainly no policy towards distribution, very little policy towards production, partially because the Film Act actually sort of conceded that Canada would not produce films in exchange for favorable mentions of Canada in Hollywood films, which essentially, the lateness of it, the concessions that were made in terms of the American industry, which at that point was extremely well established, delayed our first filmmaking efforts. So it's a little like entering a baseball game in the 7th inning, and you're kind of late. So that, I think that's impacted seriously, particularly in terms of exhibition. I mean, you don't have a history. I think Piers Hanley, our CEO, probably said it best when he said talking to a Canadian about their films is like, or Canadian films is like talking to an amnesiac. They don't actually know what they've seen, and they don't necessarily recognize it as Canadian, which is problematic. I think it's created a kind of a sensibility where, I'm mostly talking about English Canada here, there's a lack of identification with our own product. I mean, there is a certain pride, but there's a kind of a weird, almost defensive identification. If you subscribe to the theory that Canadians invented passive aggression, it's not a surprise, but there's a strange relationship with our own product.
So can you tell me a bit about how audiences can connect to the Canadian films here at the Lightbox and TIFF?
Well, we do a beautiful guide. They could also check the website, www.tiff.net, or just swing by. We usually have something Canadian playing, if not a film, the gallery exhibit that I mentioned earlier, the Pickford show. And there's usually, there's almost always something Canadian on in the building, which is great. I should mention that we are doing a series in partnership with the Juno Awards, which will show a lot of key Canadian filmmakers, and we'll show one of my favorite Canadian films, Hardcore Logo, the Bruce.
Check out tiff.net for more news about Canadian films at the Bell Lightbox.